Hi, welcome. My name is Chris Smith, shambles guru on the internet, and this is the Relationship Manifesto. And I'm here with the Relationship Manifesto's dad, Dr. Stephen Whitehead, academic author, relationship coach and researcher, and dad of his book, and actually dad of several kids, as you'll have picked up in earlier podcasts as well.
Thank you.
And this is episode 10 of the podcast, which is chapter 9 of the book. And chapter 9, the title of chapter 9 is Always Be Honest, especially when you don't want to be. I only hesitated then because I wasn't sure if I'd dropped my H's in honest, right? It's always be honest, especially when you don't want to be. And as usual with all of these podcasts, our preparation takes place 5 minutes before them when I ask Stephen, what should I ask him about? And he nearly always starts off, his answer is nearly always, well, this is going to be a tricky one.
This is a tricky one.
So it's yet another tricky one. Stephen, do you have your elevator pitch?
Well, the elevator pitch. Honesty is tricky because it's not easy to be honest all the time, and it may not even be desirable. But I'm suggesting in the book that it's preferable than lying. But I'm also going to talk about the different types of honesty. So there's different ways of being honest, and not just relating to lies and deceit. There's some even more important ways of being honest in a relationship, which I want to highlight.
Wow, that's going to be interesting.
Now that's got your attention.
It has actually different types of honesty. You know.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe we should get Bill Clinton into this. Oh, sorry, no politics in these, right? It's okay. That was.
I like Bill Clinton.
Well, I do as well, actually. Yeah. Welcome to this podcast on USA politics, right? It's in an honest way. Oh, yes. We better not continue that. Right, the chapter. How does it start off?
The main point is never lie in a relationship. You be honest, even if it means you inadvertently hurt your partner, and that's not an easy thing to. It's an easy thing to say, but it's not an easy thing to do. To be in a situation where you're living with someone who you love and you've made a commitment to, and to never lie, never hold back a truth. Of course, there's many situations where we would wish to lie, and you might even argue that what's euphemistically called the white lie, the sort of benign lie, is almost essential. And I think that may be the case. But ultimately, lies will create an undercurrent of deceit, an undercurrent of lack of trust. And it's the lack of trust in a relationship that is the killer. Excuse me. It's not the... I mean, although I've said in other podcasts that one of the main reasons why relationships break up is because of sexual deceit, where couples are unfaithful. Often the sexual aspects of a relationship can be overcome or dealt with or managed through openness. It's when there isn't openness and people are living out expectations which are not being achieved. And then the realization comes one day, well, this person's not the person I thought they were. And then your world falls down.
Because of the conceit.
Because of the conceit, yes. Yeah. Let me give you an example of the way in which a world can break down through lies. And the most obvious one, let's go back to the sexual deceit one. You're in a relationship, you love each other, and in all respects bar the sexual one, it's working okay. But sex is complicated, as we've looked at in other podcasts, and it's a very powerful dynamic in our lives, and it's not one we can ignore, nor should we. So what happens is one day one of the partners finds themselves sexually attracted to someone else, and they may be able to manage that avoidance of moving any further with that for a while. But often over a period of time, and particularly in long-term relationships, there does come a point when the avoidance of sexual desire just doesn't work anymore. You do follow through with your desires, and particularly if you're the focus of attention, and you've felt that there's been a lack of intimacy in the relationship, your own relationship for a while, and suddenly to be at the focus of someone else's love, sexual desires and attention is a real big turn on.
Good for your ego too.
It's massively good for your ego, and we all like ego strokes. So you move on and you get involved, and suddenly from being in a relationship that's been should we say pottering along nicely in a way for some years, though hardly without the passion, possibly without the passion, suddenly there is passion in the relationship, but it's coming in from the third person that's in the relationship. It's not coming in from the couple. What to do in that situation? Because I've just said you don't lie. Yes. Well, and I preempted your question there, Chris, because I could see it coming. My suggestion in that situation is you don't tell the truth.
So, okay, you've got right. Okay.
No, you don't tell the truth. If you're asked, you tell the truth. You don't tell. And this is my advice in the book, and it's my advice to couples who are listening to this. If you're going to be in an affair, and you're in a long-term relationship, where being in an affair is not been built into the dynamics of the relationship. In other words, it's a non-negotiable aspect.
Yes.
And I have to say, in many relationships, it's a very negotiable aspect. But let's just go with those relationships where it's a non-negotiable aspect. In that situation, you're in a relationship, and this applies for straight and gay relationships, both. You're in a relationship, and the assumption is absolutely embedded in neither party plays away.
Yes.
Then one party does. And so often it does happen. What do? You don't tell. Because if you've moved into that domain, if you've moved into a situation of playing with one person, another person, a third party, you have to keep that to yourself. You have to deal with the guilt or shame or baggage or insecurity or fear, whatever comes with it. You have to deal with that, and you have to carry it. If you can't do it, don't play. Now, that is not actually lying. And I know it's a semantic here, but I'm talking about close relationships.
I think there's a number of listeners who are now groaning about this. They go, "You must be joking,"
I know, but it's the fact is that most relationships come to grief over sexual infidelity, but not the open relationships. And now we're back to sex and sexuality, where it's best to be open. But let's deal with relationships that aren't open; they're closed. In those situations, my strong advice is you don't tell. I know many couples that are still together after a long period, and both parties have played, and they haven't told. And it doesn't matter. Those affairs were brief. They may have lasted a week or two. They may have lasted a few months. In some instances, there may have been some sort of casual liaison that went on for a few years. But in the end, they finished. Because neither party actually wanted to split up. They wanted to carry on. They were happy and content in the relationship. That sometimes you just need sexual pleasure outside the relationship. It's an entirely normal human reaction, desire, need. It's impossible and nor should anybody say you cannot do it, because people do it all the time.
What about the question that makes me think of the question: can you have sexual relationships without it being an emotional relationship?
Oh yeah. You can be intimate in the moment of the sexual engagement, but you don't necessarily have to take that back and live it out every 24 hours a day. Of course you can have people have sex all the time without getting emotionally exposed by it. It depends on the dynamic of the couple involved. I mean, it's entirely possible to have a sort of instrumental intimacy, a sort of detached intimacy, if you like, where it's warm, it's okay, and it's nice, but this person's not someone you want to spend not just even the rest of your life with, but probably not even the rest of the week. That's okay. But coming back to the situation of the deceit, my recommendation to avoid the deceit is to have an open relationship where if you are going to go into, you need to explore this in the relationship early on, and that way you avoid the lies. But of course, not many people can handle honesty. They don't want to know that their partner has got sexual desires, which are emerging for other individuals. So rather than face the truth, they'd rather go with the continued illusion that everything's okay. Now, if you're going to continue that, then do so. I mean, I say it, many couples survive and long term, entirely because neither party is explicit about what they're doing or what they may have been doing for some time. That's okay. But if you get asked, then that's a different situation. And then I'm saying, if you get asked, then I think you have to reveal it. Then you're into avoiding the lie.
Okay, so the next chapter is avoidance tactics. It's can I ask you if I was going to use the word stray. Stray is actually quite a negative word, isn't it?
Yeah,
stray is almost like I've done something wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, you're absolutely spot on there, Chris. It is. Again, it's part of the. It's a pejorative term immediately because it implies.
It's a negative word, isn't it?
You've sinned,
Yes.
That you've sinned. You've strayed. You've sinned. You've gone off the path, and let's avoid all that. People have needs. And we're coming back to the idea that people can stay with one partner sexually, exclusively, for decade after decade after decade.
Yes.
You and I know it's not possible. I know I've seen all around me. I haven't met anybody who does that.
Yes.
There might be people listening to this who can say, well, I've done it. There might be someone listening to this now who's maybe in their 50s and they've been married for 20 years or 30 years and they've never ever played away. Fine. And their partner's never played away. That's fine. I have to say to you, you're the exception. You're the exception. Most people do. We're in a situation, as I said before in other podcasts, where relationships don't last too long.
Yes.
In the recent research that was done in the UK shows that the average marriage now, or lifespan of a committed relationship or a marriage relationship, is 11 years. And non, the less intense relationships last much less time than that. So sex is a major player. We have the desires. We're in a very sexualized culture, and it in many ways it's all around us. It's available on the internet. It's available on the high street. How do we deal with this when we're in a relationship? First of all, try and be honest by being honest about what your needs are. Be open. I'm not countenancing and recommending that you are deceitful, and I'm not countenancing and recommending that people, shall we use that word, stray. What I am suggesting very strongly that you have to be honest in the relationship. So as I said to you before, there's a number of different aspects to honesty. One is being honest about what your needs are. Now, if you know you're the sort of man or woman who's going to find it incredibly difficult to be with one partner sexually, I'm not talking about intimately or with love, but sexually, you could be with just one partner sexually for decade after decade. You have to recognise that.
Yes.
Do not accept, just because society tells you, well, it's wrong to stray. Forget that ideology. Avoid it. That's where the guilt trip comes in, and we want to avoid all that stuff. We're looking to try and make relationships last, not people carry unreasonable baggage from decade after decade. So that's one thing.
Yes. Be
Be clear about what your needs are, about what it is you can do and cannot do, and get that out up front early on in the relationship. And if your partner can't accept it, then split. Then there's no pain.
But we change though, don't we? When you first meet somebody, and if it's your soulmate, if it's that type of relationship,
Sure.
your soulmate. I've forgotten the term for it.
Soulmate.
It was a soulmate relationship.
Sure.
When you first meet, you're blinkered.
Of course.
You're not. Your eyes aren't going to stray. Never mind other bodily parts. Your eyes are not going to stray.
Absolutely.
And so you would make that decision. You're less likely to say, well, yeah, of course we'll be able to, we'll stray later as our relationship grows. But when you first meet, you're never going to say that because you're in love with each other. So sort of almost write a contract in that first 6 months of your relationship. It's just not practical.
No, it's not, and it's a very difficult thing to say, but it is possible to say it. And I think it's it's honest, isn't it, to say it? Because you're actually following. You're in the situation of being in love, and it's an overwhelming experience. And in that moment, as you quite rightly say, you don't want to stray, or you don't look anywhere else. You're completely absorbed in your partner. But we all know that state of affairs, that mental state, if you like, that emotional state, doesn't last indefinitely. And what do you then do? And this is a big question. What do you then do? Do you because you've started something which assumes a continuity to it. There's the idea of commitment here. I love this person my soulmate. I'm only going to be with them. I'm going to be with them for the rest of life. Well, I don't. The sex thing we can deal with by being open about it, by recognizing that people have needs. But sometimes it's just good not to reveal it. It really is. That, I know many strong marriages where both parties have had their little affairs, but it's not been put on the table. They've just accepted that's part of it. It's part of the dynamic.
And they don't volunteer it.
They don't volunteer it.
And they're not asking their
They're
partners.
not asking. They're just getting on day to day, and they stay together, and they love each other immensely. And both parties have grown up and matured and realised that all that's going on here is a bit of sexual fun, a bit of physical fun. There is no way that what's been a bit of physical fun in some other bedroom in some other part of the city is going to destroy the relationship.
Yes.
It's going to destroy the marriage.
Yes. For me, I think it's a big difficulty separating sexual from emotional. With many people that I've, many friends and colleagues, I think that's a difficult thing for people to do. Can I ask you about an interesting sort of stereotype? How would you respond to somebody saying, well, it's always the guys who stray, and it's always the guys who are lying? How do you respond to that?
Women lie well. Women are far better at keeping secrets.
Keeping secrets and lying is not the same thing as you're saying.
Well,
right?
women have. What we've got here, let's assume for the moment that there's this fundamental difference between the sexes. What we have got is that it seems to be that women acquire, and girls acquire, a greater level of sensitivity to the social environment in which they live. That they're much more tuned into the gaze of other women, for example. They develop a more heightened awareness, intuition, and emotional intelligence about the world, about themselves, and particularly about the people that they have a close connection with. Now, all this creates a situation with a woman. I mean, there are exceptions to this, sure, but I think, bear with me for the moment, we're looking at a generalization, a general statement, that there is this situation where femininity, learning to be an adult woman, it requires, comes with it a certain heightened sensitivity towards the social experience, the social world which you're in. Now that creates a situation where you can, and it goes against the stereotype, where you can actually manage your emotions in a particular way. The idea that women are more emotional than men is again, it's a bit of a myth. But
so you're saying women have empathy with other people around them more than men do? And are you saying men are more selfish?
It may not always be empathy, but it's an awareness. It's an intuition, and they will women if a woman decides to play, and she's in a relationship, a wife or whatever, and she goes off into a bit of have sexual fun somewhere. Invariably, the woman can manage it far better than men. It's the men who carry the guilt. It's the men who get overwhelmed with the burden of the lie.
So it's the men, not the women, who are going to say, "I'm sorry, dear, but I have to tell you this.
Yeah,
I don't want to, but I'm going to have to tell you this."
Absolutely, and that is, men just don't. They're not. There are some men who are really accomplished, if you like, at this, but most men who stumble into illicit relationships almost without realizing it, and certainly they're not practiced in doing this. These men are very vulnerable, and invariably they will come back to the wife and they'll beg forgiveness. They'll look for absolution, and believe me, it doesn't come.
That was going to be my next question. Is you've got a relationship and the guy's just has come back saying, look, we've been together for 8 years now. I did stray with, I was up at the conference and did stray, and it was nothing. It was physical. There was no mental thing. I'll never see her again.
Get your bags packed, because you're on your way.
Really?
Absolutely. You're not going to be forgiven. It'd be very unusual, because you've broken all the rules. You see, you've done it without. There was no preparation. The wife had no indication this was going to happen. Let's say she believes that you go away for your conference or whatever, and you're going to be a good boy, and she's trusted you and all the rest of it. But then suddenly she finds out that you played with someone else. Her whole life has crumbled in a moment. The edifice on which she's built her relationship, the family, the whole thing, built on the trust and love for you, is gone in a moment. You've destroyed it.
Yes.
She's got to build that up, and she's now faced with the fact: how am I going to build that up when I can no longer trust him? And the other thing is, you then appear weak. You then appear weak in that moment. You've gone to your wife and you said, "Look, I want forgiveness." You're putting the pressure on her. You're asking her to. It's almost like a confessional.
Yes.
I'm going back. I want you to. I have to confess this, darling, because I've been a bad boy, but I want you to just pat me on the back, slap my wrist, and let me go. Let me go on again.
Sounds like very I was. Hypocritical, actually, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The women won't do it. She'll never forgive you. And most women in that situation, it's the beginning of the end at that point. And the end can come very quickly, and I've seen it in relationships. So
you're saying, just to recap, because the title of this, as a reminder, the title of this chapter is Always Be Honest, especially when you don't want to be. You're actually saying, always be honest. There's something missing there. It's maybe don't always be voluntarily honest.
Don't always be voluntarily honest. If you, I say, I want to be clear about this, and I'm particularly interested in this situation of how we get through this tricky, complicated maze of the infidelity, the sexual relationship outside of the marriage. And many men and women in strong relationships have open relationships. You
say many. I'm curious about this. I just wonder. What are the statistics? How would you know?
Doubt this. Just go on the internet and have a look at the swingers clubs in the UK. Have a look at the number of swingers clubs in the States. Have a look at the number of swingers clubs in Europe. Who is patronising these swingers clubs? It's couples.
But isn't that a very, very... And I haven't, and I don't know. Am I just perception? Isn't it a very, 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 very small percentage of the population?
If you go on the internet now and you have a look at the phenomena of couples available for play with other couples, it's phenomenal.
Really?
Absolutely. And it's growing all the time. And the internet's only fuels a need or desire that's been out there in the past.
Are you talking about a specific age group, or is this the spectrum?
No, it's spectrum? Across all the spectrum, from the 20s up until the 60s, sure. Yeah. But that aside, we're in a situation where people get tempted. We're in a situation where we've fallen in love, we've got a soulmate, we want to be with that person in a harmonious way, loving way for the rest of our life, ideally. But then reality kicks in. The sex isn't quite so sparky after 5 years as it was after 5 days. And after 15 years, it can often have disappeared altogether. But, you still got desires. You look at yourself, you're not an old man, you're not an old woman, you've still got needs, you still like to be attractive. And people will play, people will have affairs. It happens all the time. There's offices around the world full of people having affairs with each other.
My old grandma would say, "Have a cold shower, boy."
Have a cold shower, yeah.
Yeah. Isn't a cold shower the answer?
Well, maybe we should put saltpeter in the water. That's what they did in the army, wasn't it? To avoid the soldiers getting too excited.
Did they really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
in the British Army, they doctored the water.
Well, I certainly know the Americans did it, but it's. Whatever it takes. I mean, that all it suggests, there is a situation. So we have strong desires for sexual companionship, sexual expression, and we're going to satisfy them one way or another. And if you are going to play, my first advice is be open in the relationship before you start playing. It's far better than having to be found out later.
But this has been a theme through the whole book so far, right? Isn't it a theme for a really good relationship? Is be open.
Be open. Be open and honest. And about yourself. And this is why I want to come on to different aspects of honesty in a minute. But the other thing is, if you have actually crossed that line and you are actually playing, and you're in a close relationship where that playing is not going to be accepted by your partner, then you say nothing. You let this relationship with the other person just peter out, because it will do eventually. Yes. And if you don't want it to peter out, then recognise that. In which case, it's now the beginning of the ultimate split. So don't reveal, and don't think for 1 minute that if you do reveal, you're going to be forgiven. You cannot go back to where you were.
Sounds like you're going to get executed, not you're certainly forgiven, not going to, right?
Well, you're certainly you're certainly not going to be forgiven, and it's going to be a major problem. But if in the situation you are asked, then I think honesty is the best policy, and I think you don't want to be in that situation. Ideally, you've got to go for an open relationship, and that brings me back to the other aspects of honesty.
Okay, you wanted to talk about that, different aspects of honesty.
Yeah, there's not just lies and deceit, which is what we often think about. There's another very subversive type of dishonesty, which isn't seen as dishonesty, but it is being dishonest, and that's not being who you really are. Now, what happens, particularly early on in a relationship, is that the couple come together and it's working okay, but one party is pretending to be someone they're not. One party is not actually being honest about who they are. They're not being honest about the way they live their life. They're not being honest about their desires, about their needs. They're not being honest about their strengths and weaknesses, and they know them. This person knows. We all know our strengths and weaknesses. We all know what our desires are. But if you've got a situation where one person is
just playing a role,
yeah. And I've got an example of this. It's going to be in the book. It's a case study of someone I know very well, and this woman who's in a over 40. Has been in marriage, been in a long-term relationship, and is now out of that, and is now a single woman. And
Western in the West.
She's a Western woman. Yeah. She's highly intelligent. She's very attractive, and she's very independent. And she's also she's got a very good brain, and she's quite confident in herself, and she's a feminist because she's quite clear about what she likes and about equality and all the rest of it. And she's there was some years back she was involved in a relationship with a guy, and this guy didn't agree with everything that he didn't like some aspects of her. He wasn't comfortable with some aspects of her personality. But rather than, he pretended to be someone that fitted with her life, with her style and what she was looking for. He'd worked out.
So he hid those dislikes.
He hid those dislikes, and but she spotted it because she was clever. She understood that he was playing a role. He was performing in order to please her. He wasn't being who he was, and of course at that point she lost faith in him. She lost trust in him, and she lost respect for him then, because it was going nowhere, and she saw beyond the performance. So if you're in a situation where you are, and guys can try this. Often men will try this. They try and work out what it is they've got to be to seduce the woman, to be liked. What is it I've got to do to be liked here?
Yes.
And they go along with it for a while, but they can't sustain it indefinitely. Yes. And that's a form of dishonesty, which is it's always going to cripple the relationship in the end.
But isn't there, that's not in black and white. That could happen at a very low level or a very high level. Is there an intensity element to that sort of deceit? It could be something very small to do with the sort of foods I like, or it could be very big in like I wouldn't like to live in Asia, which I'm pretending I would live in Asia. So there's a level of deceit there.
There is a level of deceit, and I think let's deal with that one about the foods one likes. I mean, you might, and it's a good example. I mean, you might find yourself in a relationship with someone who's a vegan.
Yes.
And you can tolerate that, and you might like your good piece of beef.
Yes.
Juicy beef and your chicken and whatever, and you might be able to tolerate that difference in your partner for a while. But in the beginning, you do accept it, and you make allowances, you make accommodations. You go to these vegan restaurants when really you want to be going to the steak bar.
Yes.
And you making this accommodation, which is again it's an important form of dishonesty, is keeping the relationship together. But ultimately, we all know that's not going to last. Ultimately, if
you're going to sneak off for the hamburger.
For some people, it's not going to be an issue. They can handle these differences. And we're just giving the example of diet, but smoking might be another one.
It's funny you should say that, because I have an experience with smoking.
Yeah.
I had a long relationship in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And the one thing I said right from the very beginning is, I'm just an anti-smoker. I always have been. But the girl went on, eventually after a few years, kept going. And you can smell the person's smoke. And it broke the relationship up. And
it can be a killer.
I never analysed it, but, it was just didn't feel right.
Often it's okay in the beginning, because these are not relationships that are going to go on long. But and for a while you can make the accommodations, and you can just enjoy the relationship for the length of time that you're in it. But these can be fundamental divisions which are never, or barriers which are never going to be overcome. And the
location one is an interesting one. We mentioned the food, the smoking. Because again, with expat families, it's very interesting, because sometimes. And one of the members of the family are offered a job overseas, and they want to move there because it's financially going to be very beneficial for the family. The kids will get a more international, widen their horizons internationally. And the spouse, and I say spouse, because male or female, even though the spouse doesn't want to go overseas because they haven't got a job to go to, they'll say, right, I'll come with you. But the number of relationships I've seen where eventually the spouse sort of exerts pressure in one way or another to go back to the home country.
Sure.
And that's sad, because usually the one that's working there has more purpose and feels very sad about going back. And I can see the rifts being forming there, and which is a pity.
What you're indicating there is interesting, because it's just highlighting all the reefs. It's like looking at the relationships a ship on the water, but there's reefs underneath us all the time, and we just we don't know they're coming up until we hit one, and then we've got to back off quick and sail off somewhere else. And that takes negotiation. And negotiation is about communication, and that's something I'm going to look at in the next podcast. But you've got to share, and that's why honesty is so important. You've got to be open, and that's the other. And this brings me to the third aspect of this. We looked at lies and deceit, which are tricky enough. Then there's this issue about who you are yourself, and avoid performing a role which is artificial. Avoid that can't be sustained and isn't really reflect who you are. And the other aspect is you've got to know what you want. You've got to know what you expect, and you've got to know how far you can go and what you can give and what you can't give. Ultimately, relationships are about maturing. We mature into relationships. It's the advantage of being young in going into a relationship in our 20s is that we might be blinkered by the illusions of happy ever after, but then again we've got the energy and optimism of youth. We probably don't have so much baggage, we don't have so much cynicism, we don't have so much regret. We have a lot of hope.
We're indestructible.
We are pretty indestructible at that age, and that's a great benefit. And I see it in young people and go for it. But there is no avoiding the fact that indestructibility of youth is going to get tested down the line. And one of the key points about growing up maturing, and we never stop growing up really. It doesn't stop when we're 21. One of the key points is learning about who we are, and knowing who we are. It also involves knowing our strengths and weaknesses, and what we like and what we don't like, and what we're looking for in a relationship. I think it's absolutely key, and all this is part of this world of honesty and openness, which the strong relationships will have.
Yes.
The big relationship, long-lasting relationships, just acquire it over a period of time.
Yes. Easier said than done.
Absolutely.
And you said knowing what you want. Actually, I find that's a problem, because especially younger, I know that I didn't know what I wanted.
Yeah,
and
sure.
To be honest, I'm not even sure. Well, no, I do. I think with wisdom, as you get older, you do get a clearer vision of what a vision of your future and what you hope your future will be. But certainly when I was a youngster, there was, what I wanted was pretty obvious and short term, and nothing to do with signing up for a Provident Fund insurance policy, right?
Sure,
It's
sure,
on that. But our time's up, actually. We've gone well over the time. Are there any other? You said different aspects of honesty. Have we missed any?
No, just to wrap it up. I mean, the only practical suggestion I've got is that you just avoid lying. The truth can hurt, but it's the loss of trust that kills the relationship. And whatever you can do to avoid that loss of trust happening, fine. And if it means you saying from the outset, look, my love, I love you very much. I want to be with you for the rest of my life, but there are going to be times when I'm going to be tempted, and I may just stray. I know it's a hard one, but I would really say try and get out in the open in the beginning. We've looked at this in the podcast on sex and sexuality. We're seeing more marriages, both gay and open, gay and straight marriages, following this line, and they're lasting longer.
That's a great summary, but I'm not going to let you stop there. Actually, I want to ask you one more question that came to mind earlier. Right? It's thinking of when you're being very honest at the beginning.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on prenuptial agreements? Because that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Because prenuptial agreements are a bit about being open and honest, aren't they?
Yeah.
But they're also very, excuse me, you want me to sign a prenuptial agreement? Don't you trust me?
It is. Yeah.
And there's a bit of an overlap here with this chapter, I think. Is there?
There is. I think you're right. I think it's a good point, and you've raised something that needs to be in the chapter. I think the prenuptial agreement's not something I've ever signed for, but I've not put it down in writing. But there's been agreements, there's been understandings, but there's been that understanding's been there on the table about different things. If you've got to write it down. That's fine. But you need to have something. To go into a relationship without any agreement whatsoever, without any preparation for what comes next.
But aren't these called marriage vows? Till death us do part. What else is in there? For better or for worse?
Yeah, but this is
I won't go out boozing on my own at night.
But then we have the vow, but the vows aren't holding relationships together. It's not enough. The vows are not holding relationships together. If you want, and if we're talking about a marriage vow in a church, in the eyes of God, then I was reading research only last week that shows that about 8 or 9 countries, major countries in the world now, not all of them in the West, though most of them, where religion's probably going to be finished altogether with, and by the end of this century there won't be any. So the idea of even having for many people, having a universal presence, a God who's going to hold us to this vow, it's not cutting it anymore. And even those people who are religious, who do believe in God as being the ultimate arbiter of their future, even they get divorced. So the vows aren't enough. There has to be something else. If you want a prenuptial agreement, you get it written down, then fine. But
okay, so
you have something.
My challenge to you now, and listeners will realise that the book isn't written yet. The book is actually growing as this podcast series is growing as well. It's a really nice sort of synergy that's happening, and I know from discussions.
What's coming next, Chris? But
I know from the discussions we've had off air that the podcast is really providing feedback and you're changing on some things, aren't you? What I'd love to see you do, and I'm not going to ask you for it now, but what I challenge you, that somewhere in the book it has the Dr. Stephen Whitehead rewritten marriage vows.
Okay.
You'd actually rewrite them to fit in with all the philosophy, with all the ideas that we've talked about and we've yet to talk about.
That's a superb idea, actually. Then that will be a real challenge. I should do that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That's a moment of genius.
and we've gone well over on this.
Okay.
We're talking about honesty. We seem to be I'm getting worse at timekeeping. It's not good. As a reminder to listeners, please visit the blog, relationshipmanifesto.posterous.com. Feel free to leave comments there, and we love to see them. We really want to, where
Absolutely.
we can make this as a dialogue. And we've had some comments already, which have been really. Actually, it's been. The comment I read recently was I thought very eye-opening. Actually,
yeah,
it was
good,
and very honest.
Yeah.
So and I appreciate that. You know who you were, probably. So thanks very much. And so that brings us to the end of episode 10, or the 10th podcast, which is actually chapter 9 of the book. Always be honest, especially when you don't want to be. I want to put on the end of that the word sometimes, maybe, not so often, or whatever. The next chapter, next week when we meet again, is silence is golden sometimes. Actually, that sounds like it's going to run on from this conversation.
It does.
Right?
It connects. Yeah.
Silence is golden sometimes. Stephen, thanks very much again. And
thank you, Chris.
Ladies and gents, boys and girls, hope to see you again or hear from you again next week. Have fun.